I've got one question in advance that we'll be going over that could take a few minutes for an answer. That'll take up some time, and maybe some more questions will come along the way. This is the first of these that I've done here at the parish through Facebook, so it shall be interesting and see where it goes. I see that Presbyteria Calliope is joining us, which I'm glad, because she had sent in a wonderful question for us regarding the 8 tones in the Orthodox Church. And so that's what we'll start with tonight. The 8 tones, as they're known, it is called that because there is 8 separate tones that we rotate each week in our liturgical service. Starting, say, this week, this coming Sunday for Thomas Sunday, for Antipascha, it's tone 1. We begin new after Pascha, so it'll be tone 1. And then the next week, the next Sunday, it'll be tone 2, and then tone 3, tone 4, and so forth. And then we start again at tone 1 once we get past tone 8. The Orthodox Church, in the early centuries, they didn't have the hymnography we had now. So, and most of the times they were singing from the Psaltery and the Psalms, and it was done in unison. It would probably be the tradition of the Hebrews, the Jewish customs, traditions that they inherited. By the time the 4th century came around, they started having a more a routine hymnography. And it wasn't until Christos Voskresie, Justin, thanks for joining us. It was in the not until like the 7th, 8th century that it became as what we know today. Of this was the 8 tones, and we call this in the Orthodox Church the Aktoikoi. The Aktokos, which basically means 8 tones, and it was written by St. John of Damascus, St. John Damascene, and those are the resurrection hymns of the 8 tones that we sing each Sunday in the church. And these hymns are all the same, regardless of jurisdiction, regardless of nationality of your church. These are all the same, all of them. And so we have these 8 tones and that we sing every Sunday, and that from the Aktoiko. And what's unique about it, though, is that these hymns are sung in a tone for different hymns. So if you've been into the Vespers, you'll recall that there's the Lord I have cried that we sing at Vespers, and all the verses, the stichera, that are sung in that tone of that week, and it has each tone has a different melody to it. And then we also have the canon at Matins, and the Irmosi or Katavasya, and these two. Truly is risen, Frank. Thanks for watching. These two have their own melody based on these 8 tones. Yes, Justin, we're going to be getting into where you are talking about the tones and how they change, and I'll get to how they change. That was part of Presbyteria Calliope's question as well. So the 8 tones, so again, Lord I've called verses have their own melody. The Irmos have their own melody. The Troparian and Kantakian have their own melody, 8 melodies. And then also the what we have is the Prokimen and the Alleluia. They're all having 8 melodies. So even though we say we have 8 tones in the system, when you think about all the different variations of those tones, it's much more. Judy, truly is risen. Thanks for being with us. So that is, but all those hymnography, they're all the same. They're all the same as far as the text goes. The variation in the melodies and is we'll talk about a little bit here. Take a look at some notes here that I heard. So regarding the differences between as Presbyter Calliope asked, the jurisdictions and the Byzantine tones and the Slavic tones. Well, like all things, they've developed. Things have developed along national or in local lines, I would say, in the cultural differences. So the Octoikos was coming from St. John of Damascus, was coming from a tradition of the Palestinian inheritance. So the monastery St. Sabas there near Jerusalem was influential in coming up with the hymnography of the church. And so it took on that flavor, that Byzantine flavor, and that is custom among all of the churches in that area. So the churches of Antioch and Jerusalem and Constantinople, even Bulgaria and Serbia, they're all going to have a very similar way of chanting the music and the 8 tones. They may have a little bit of variation, but it's pretty much you're going to be able to follow along. It's going to be very similar along those lines. And then as time went on, the Studite Monastery, Constantinople, added more hymns. We added more hymns and added more hymns. So it was when the Slavic lands were converted to Orthodoxy, the Bulgarians, because they spoke a similar Slavic tongue as those in the Slavic lands of Ukraine, Russia, and Kiev and Rus, their music came up, and it was picked up, and over time, that's what was sung, those Bulgarian melodies, and it transferred into what we call znameni chant. Znameni chant, it means of the sign, because the music was dictated by an ancient sign. It's not the Western notation music that we know today. And so it's a very long, melodic singing, the znameni, and it's all in unison as well. And you'll find these in maybe old believer, old rite churches today, still using znameni. You can still hear it in many of our churches as well, certain hymns. In the Vala Monastery, the big monastery in the great north of Russia, they have their own little variation of znameni chant. It's very beautiful. But over time, that was simplified. So znameni became more of they simplified that znameni, and it became what's called Kievan chant. And then over time, we were influenced from the West and the Russian church with the choral music, So that meaning that's going to be 4-part harmonies or multiple part harmonies. And so you see that influence on the Russian tones, and so they're taking their own flavor here. And then later, say the 18th century onward, you'll see that the Kievan chant was simplified even further, and it was done on purpose. It was simplified to what we call the obikod, sometimes called as court chant, because it was really sung in the courts of the Tsar, the imperial courts in St. Petersburg. And it was written by Lvov and Bakhmatov, and their whole goal really was to make it a chant system that was the easiest to learn. And if you've been especially if you've been to a Byzantine chant service that does Byzantine chant, it's very complicated. Znameni can be a very complicated way of singing. Most people are learning by ear, and so it could be these long melodies are difficult, and so they simplified it, these 8 tones, so that they can be more easily learned and taught. And because again, people were learning most of this by ear, just by doing it, and so they simplified it so that this is what we see in the most modern Russian Orthodox churches and the churches of Slavic origin today. But even then, everyone has a variety. Carpatho Russians have an old historic way of chanting their tones. So as well as some places within, there's these local variations, but they're all based on the text of the Octoiko. That's where the 8 tones come from. And to get things more complicated, not only do we have the Octoiko, which breaks down the 8 tones into stikere, into Chopar Kentakian, into Irmosi, into Prokimin Alleluia. Not only do that, but as the church through the centuries, the hymnography got bigger because we have more hymns, more saints that we're commemorating, that for each of the day, so Sunday may be tone 1, like this coming Sunday may be tone 1, but you may have a saint that is a large saint that you're going to commemorate. That saint hymns may be written in tone 4, and that information is found not in the octoical, but in what we call the book of the Manaean, which means month, and basically it means the monthly book in Greek. And so each month you have a daily commemoration, and those hymns will get in. So you'll see oftentimes in the services, you'll see that we say in the 8th tone, in the 4th tone, we're switching tones a lot. We're switching tones a lot because we're adding commemorations on top of the 8 tones for the Sunday, and for the week we're doing the daily commemorations. So we're adding more into it. And then also you have to know that our liturgical cycle is not just the Sunday cycle, and it's not just the saint cycle, but we have Lent, we take hymns from the Triodian, and we have what we are now in Pascha. So we have these the Pentecostarian. So we take our hymnography from there, and they're all going to be in different tones as well. So to be a choir director, to be a singer in the church, it takes a lot of talent. It takes a lot of learning. It takes and it's a ministry. In fact, I think it's sometimes easier. As we hear that there's priest shortages in the church, I think there's more shortage of talented choir directors. It's probably easier sometimes to find a priest for your church than a talented choir director. So we should honor them for being able to manage all this, because it's not easy to manage. It's not easy to put a service together. It's not easy to learn all the different chant tones of the church. So yes, so all the hymnography, textually wise, there's no difference whether you're in the church in Antioch, Constantinople, or Russia, but they are the tones, and they're all basically all the same. Structured wise, how we put the service together, it's just, but the variation in singing is because of local tradition and development over time. Justin asked if you think we think perfecting the tones is necessary to become ordained. Well, I think that all clergy should be familiar with the tones. They should be maybe capable, but I don't think that, at least in my opinion, and I guess opinion of most bishops, because I know a lot of priests that are not the best singers, that it's not a prerequisite to be ordained. In fact, there's a running joke that good deacons with good voices, they stay deacons and never ordained a priest because of their voice, but the priests or the deacons with the more weaker voices, they get ordained to priesthood pretty quickly, because as we know, a diaconal service with the deacon serving, that they're doing most of the leading as far as the liturgy goes and liturgical cycles. If there's a deacon there, they do quite majority of the leading of the people there. So there's a few questions here that came up, and let me see if we can pull those up. So Justin, I hope I answered sufficiently about the difference between Slavonic tones and the Byzantine tones. The difference is only in the local tradition and how that developed over time in the regions they came, and so they're specific to those churches. And to be all honest, they're all beautiful. But if you've grown up and you were raised and fed a certain way of singing, that's something that you hold in your heart. Someone who grew up in Byzantine chant, someone who grew up with Byzantine chant, it's irreplaceable to them. Somebody who grew up, hearing the tones in the Russian church and the hymnography that they sing, you can't separate it from them. And so to go to a Byzantine church or Russian church, sometimes even though it's the same faith, the same hymnography, it has a different ethos, as they say. It has a different feeling. And that's okay. We're tied to these things that we hear. growing up, or hear that that's what we're fed on, and that's what we look for, and we kind of are emotionally tied to it. And a lot of our feast days and stuff, we're used to hearing that, and it's okay. But it's all the same content. It's all got the same theology in that, and that is where we find most of our theology, is in the hymns of the church. Hi, Matt. Thanks for being with us today. You asked a little bit about the difference between the old rite divine liturgy versus the I guess what we call the new Russian Typikon that we celebrate today in most Russian churches. Yeah, their services are a lot longer, for sure, that they are more stringent on one, they're using probably the old Znameny chant, which takes a lot longer to sing. It's not as fast moving as some of the more modern Russian chants that we use in our church today. And they're also holding, most of the old rite churches that I know, they're doing all the services. They didn't take as many cuts down in the all night vigil. And they're usually doing the hours and the comp line and everything in there, so it can tend to be a lot longer for sure. There's not as many cuts in the service. Makes it no less valid, better, or worse, but it is that is the tradition that they hold to. So I mean, it is a beautiful thing. You can learn a lot from those old believers with their piety for sure. So Justin says that his wife is always hard time attending OCA churches because of this. Oh yes, yeah. Like I said, going to an Antiochian church. Me and my wife, the first time she heard the beautiful Antioch. They had a beautiful chanter. They had a beautiful choir singing it. But she said, oh, these hymns, they sound foreign to me. The style of chant, it was foreign to her ears, even though she had heard the Slavic chants all the time. And it is. It's a different chant. It's just a different feeling when you walk into these churches. So it takes time to get accustomed. I think a lot of the churches, here in America, some of them will be very, they hold on tightly to the traditions that they know, that they were risen with. But a lot more of the convert churches I've seen, like OCA churches, even in our own parish here, we do incorporate some of the hymnography or the style of singing from various churches. Not much, we're primarily where we sing the Kievan and Obikod tones here in our church primarily, but there's certain hymns that, say the Trisagian or the As Many Who Have Been Baptized in church, we get that from the Byzantine inheritance, and so sometimes it's nice to mix it up. There's some things that are just so beautiful in other traditions, and it's not bad to be open to those. But yes, it is difficult to adjust the whole service to them. So. Justin, did I answer your question about being ordained and perfecting tones to become an ordained person? I know I have not. My biggest regret from seminary is that I didn't take the time to learn how to become a better singer. I familiarize myself with the liturgics and the service. I see myself as a kind of a self-appointed liturgical nerd, even though I there's a lot more that I can learn, but I don't have a gift for singing, but I do the best I can. Presbyter asked, why do your altar boys disrobe when they come out from the altar to receive communion? Okay, good question. So it's a tradition that I was, my ordination and my came from the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. So this is where my faith formation comes from. That's what I'm ordained, and then I serve in a Moscow Patriarchal Church, and then that's kind of what I do. And so when I came to our church, that's what I kind of brought with me. And the one thing that they insisted upon was a teaching from St. John Maximovich. St. John of San Francisco and Shanghai. And he was always insistent that altar boys take off their robes for communion. And why did he insist that? He says to receive communion, that we receive it in the rank that we are in the church, presbyteria. So if I am a priest, I robe as a priest to take communion. If I'm a deacon, I robe as a deacon. If I'm a reader, I robe as a deacon and I receive under that. If I am not tonsured a reader, if I'm not tonsured a subdeacon, if I'm not ordained in any way, I would not wear those vestments to take communion, because that is not my rank in the church, and we receive communion as we are ranked in the church. So altar boys are blessed to put on the stikarion to help us in the altar, but they're not tonsured. They're not. That is not their outfit. That they don't wear cassocks, so to speak. And at least in the Russian church, again, all my answers are coming from my formation in the Russian church, and more specifically the Russian church abroad, okay? So it may be different in the Byzantine churches, but the practice I hold is the practice that St. John Maximovich, St. John of San Francisco, Shanghai, had reinforced for his altar servers. It's something that was taught to me. It's something, and that's why I do it here. So I got a bunch of questions coming in. So Andrew asks, could you explain why the East we use leavened bread, but in the West use unleavened bread? Okay. So that's going in a whole nother different topic, but so we've always used unleavened bread in the Orthodox Church. Well, in the Roman Catholic tradition, they've used leavened bread, and it's a different understanding of what happened at the mystical supper. So in the West, they will consider the Last Supper, the mystical supper of the Lord, when he instituted the Holy Eucharist. They say that it was a Passover meal, even though if we look at the timeline, it was a few days before the Passover took place, but a Passover meal would normally be used unleavened bread. In the East, they say that it's not a Passover meal, and if you look at the text of the Last Supper, when Christ says, "Take, eat," or "this bread is," he's in the Greek text of the Gospels, it's clearly saying arthos. And arthos in Greek means leavened bread. It doesn't say enzymos, which in Greek would be unleavened bread. So the text actually tells us that they were using leavened bread. And then to get more symbolic in it, the East always says that, the Eucharist is a living sacrifice. Christ was a living sacrifice. And so you had to offer, so when we offer the bread, it's a living sacrifice to God. And so the yeast that we use is that. It's alive. The bread is alive. Where an unleavened wafer is dead, because there's no life to it. Nothing's expanded. You're not using anything to up it. So there's the difference in the two traditions there. Just in a nutshell, very succinctly, I'm sure we could get more, scripture and theology based on it, but it is simple as that. The East holds to the fact that the scripture says arthos, leavened bread, and that we offer a living sacrifice, and the West sees it differently. They understand that differently. So, Justin, wondering about, I had only one music class entire education, and it was in elementary. Yes. Yeah, music is not something that is taught to many people anymore, Justin. We're doing the best we can to have our children immersed in the life of the church musically, and I always would recommend all children to get involved with the music of the church, because we need that ministry to develop more than anything. Like I said, I think it really is easier to find yourself a priest for your parish than a really talented choir director or singer to lead the people. So get the children involved, get them music lessons if you can, voice lessons. It's something that we have to develop. So Frank, what kind of question you got for us here? He says you have a twofold question. Let's see what I can do. So it says, without access to sacraments that some of us are experiencing, I assume you're meaning right now during this viral epidemic, how can we receive forgiveness from God without confession? And part in the second question, it's would confession via telephone be permissible and possible? Okay, so I know that you're coming from a Catholic upbringing and background, so you feel easy without access to confession. So So yeah, all our hierarchs are telling us that for a time being that, without communion in the sacrament, that our salvation, is not, it's not a salvific thing that we're missing, but I know that most of us cannot, who receive communion all the time, that's what we live for. That's what gives us the grace to get through the week, but we're being asked to kind of abstain from that, abstain from that for a time, just for the greater good of humanity. And so we're people of obedience in the church first and foremost. So if we're being obedient to our hierarchs and to our clergy in this manner, that God understands. I was told once that, receiving, say you go to confession to a priest and they give you some bad advice. You're not obligated to take that advice, but if you do take that advice and something didn't work out, something happened, but you were obedient to that, it's not your sin, it's the priest's sin. So likewise, right now, we should pray for our hearts because they were put into a very difficult position. And so anything that is that you feel like you're missing, anything that you feel like you're not, that your salvation is at risk for, they're going to be they're going to be answering for it before God. It's not something that you'll have to answer for. And as far as confession, frequent confession is the best medicine for us. And if you can't get it into a priest, you can certainly call a priest and hear it over the phone. I know that is a surprise for many people. I will only give this example as for priests and priest families who, they don't generally always hear, the priests are not generally, especially their matushka, they're not hearing their family's confession. It can be an awkward position for them, for the family and for the priest. So they go to somewhere else. They're often isolated. They don't have, their father confessor is not near around. Sometimes they don't have another church around, another priest around, where they can confess as frequently as they need. And so oftentimes clergy and their family do make use of a telephone to confess their sins. And yes, oftentimes the absolution is given over the phone. This has happened. This is just a common thing. I know most laity don't know that, but we priests, we have to make use of this sometimes in order for us to get the medicine we need and to give and to not be hypocritical to our people when we say to go to confession. Well, we go to confession and we have to sometimes be unique and creative in the way we do that. And so for the time being, it is a possibility that you can receive confession over the phone and receive spiritual direction over the phone in that manner. Especially if you're speaking with someone you trust, okay? I hope that answers that. I know it's a very difficult topic right now, okay? So liturgical music, why is there such variations in translations, is what Matushka Melanie asked. Well, it's a good question. I wish there wasn't, if in America here, a lot of American converts, people who grew up in America, they don't like to hear the old Greek, and they don't like to hear the Slavonic, especially the younger generations. And I get it. We want to worship in a language that we understand. We understand completely. And so we come up with English translations. But the benefit of the Greek and the Slavonic is that no matter what church you go to that uses that language, it is the same. It's the same. It's the same translation. But in English, there's many translations, depending on the jurisdictions that you may find yourself in, and so there's many translations out there. Not everyone is on the same page with that, and so it can be kind of tough, when you go from parish to pray in one parish over the other. It is you can try to sing along with that choir, and then all of a sudden something's wrong. It's difficult. And I don't think that there's going to be any quick fix as long as we have, different jurisdictions on the matter. I think there's an old joke that what's the difference between a terrorist and a translator? You can negotiate with a terrorist. And it's a joke because translators they hold firm to what they believe, and as the correct way. And so English, like the Bible, has a multitude of translations out there. And we have to do the best we can, even in our own parish. Sometimes when you're looking for music, to fit to do the services, you have to get creative in finding resources that one place has and another place doesn't, and so you end up putting things together, and the translations are mismatched. So it's tough in the English tradition. So you have to do the best you can with those translations that are given to you. My personal preference is to keep the translations as consistent as possible, and to I like the more traditional a way of using the rendering the pronouns in the hymnography in the scriptures. I would hope in the future, if the translations can't get to be all the same, at least that we could agree on the common text for the Our Father and the Creed. These are things that between jurisdictions, if we ever get together, that we recite together from memory, and it can be a little difficult when you're working off the two translations. So hope that answers that, Matushka. Hi, Steve. Truly is risen. You ask if I remember correctly, you converted from college, and what prompted your conversion. So just to give you a quick rundown on my conversion. So yes, I was Catholic, raised Catholic, and I attended for many years an Eastern Catholic church. Me and my wife, and that was a good experience for me. I was able to learn a lot about the Eastern Christian traditions and the Eastern. It's what I read the fathers in that church. I got a love for the liturgy as an Eastern Catholic, but the more that I learned and read, and the more that I delved into the theology, I realized that I was in my small Eastern Catholic parish, I was trying to be as Orthodox as I can, and many of my fellow brothers and sisters in that church were okay with being a Catholic with just using a different liturgy, and I did not come to believe that to be what I was. And so instead of I had to follow my conscience, and I did convert to the Orthodox Church, into the, more specifically, the Russian Orthodox Church. So that's just a real quick synopsis. I mean, there's so much more I guess I could go into, but on this little Q&A, I think just to let you know, the Church Fathers and the liturgy is what brought me to Orthodoxy in its most fullness. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Oh, that's Michael Stan's asking me about the schism that's happening right now between the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Moscow Patriarchate. How's it affected me as a priest in the USA, and where there are multiple jurisdictions overlap. So yes, it is a very hot topic, and it's very difficult topic, because many of us are estranged from each other. That's how it's affected me. There's brothers and sisters in both of these jurisdictions that are now no longer able to share the banquet of the Lord's Supper together. And it's quite unfortunate. I think most of the people, so to speak, in the pews, in the nave, they don't want this. They don't agree with it, and they wish it would end. But for the time being, there are some deep theological and canonical things that need to be sorted out in the church, and we have to be patient, and we have to rely on God's grace to solve this on His time, and that the hierarchs will do the right thing. But yes, it has made things difficult. Just a matter of being able to fully celebrate with people at their parishes. It's a difficult topic, and I guess we could do hours on that alone. But it's affected me not greatly, but enough that it hurts. Because you're estranged, and you feel more isolated. Orthodoxy is very isolated in America. Outside the walls of our churches, you step out, and we are a small minority, and it can be very lonely as an Orthodox Christian, and it seems to now we get a little bit even lonelier. So we do the best we can. We still pray for each other. We still try to be kind to each other, no matter what side of this divide we fall ourselves in. But we have to be obedient to our hierarchs for the time being on this. So Okay, so I think I answered Andrew's question about absolution, right? Over the phone, yes, it is possible. At least I've been, I have, I've received my confessions for the most part over the phone. We have the clergy get-togethers every so often, which we can confess, to another priest in a safe environment. We hold these for that manner, and we can definitely get together and we confess to each other. But in between there's a lot of sins that pile up, and so yes, we have to confess, and we do receive confession over the phone, and absolution as well. Justin asks, he's asking about the traditional English Orthodox Bible versus the traditional English liturgy. Yeah, well, King James can be awkward, and translations are awkward in general. I assume you're taking a personal stance that you'd rather have more of a modern language than the Elizabethan English. It's just a personal thing for me. That's what I've always heard, and so that's what I don't really. I think we should elevate our language as much as we can when we're in the church, for the beauty and for the reverence of it. But again, it's my personal opinion. As we said, there's so many translations in America. Everyone must have an opinion on that, and I'm sure. So, at least in my church, that's what we try to do. The best. We try to use that type of translation in language in my parish here. As rector, I guess I hold that authority, I guess, for the time being, until someone pushes back on me. So. Yes. So, well, modern. I guess you're Justin. You're asking again about the translation for modern North Americans. I think most people can understand the traditional language. You don't have to use all. In fact, the King James English version. You don't have to use all of that type of language in order. You can still keep the traditional pronouns of that language, I guess, without using all the archaic language that is found in that Bible. But majority of people do understand it. There's very few instances where it can get too complicated there, Justin. Okay, so so that's about it. So if there's let's see, I got one more question, and we'll just answer this one, and we kept this. I wanted to keep this about 30-40 minutes, so we're in that area now. But let's take another question. Matt asks if there's a reason that the Great and Holy Council of Crete did not muster the support of Russia or some other churches. I know the Greek church was rather disappointed. I believe the Greeks recognized it. At least there was. Okay, I get the gist of your question here. So the Russians and all the Orthodox churches participated in the preparation meetings for that council in Crete upcoming. Then, as these meetings went, as far as I know, there was many topics that were to be covered, and that there could not be an agreement on. There's no one who can agree on it. So many of the topics fell out. They were just stricken from the agenda at this council. So many of the very important topics, such as jurisdictionalism, such as how we grant autocephaly, which we know is one of the reasons why we've got this division between Moscow and Constantinople today. So a lot of these things were just, there could not be an agreement, and no one would go. So there was it just kind of boiled down to a few things. And at the last minute, there was some churches that would not agree to go to the church. Moscow, of course, was one of them, but there were many other churches that didn't go. The Bulgarians, the Georgians. So there was other local churches that would not go they weren't in agreement. A lot of the stuff was so how these work, that these pre-council meetings would get you, they would get together and they would talk about the various topics, and they would try to, get everything sorted out so that when they got to Crete, it would be a rubber stamp. And some churches thought, no, when we call to a council, we should still be able to be open to adapt and edit documents, and let the Spirit, be able to. And this is how all ecumenical councils happened in the past, that, we were guided by the Holy Spirit at this council. So we would come together and we would talk about these things, and then we would come to a conclusion. But the Crete Council was all pre-decided. The documents were already pre-worked up. By the time they got there, it was just a matter of, kind of, in my opinion, a photo op and to confirm it. And so as the various topics that were very important to many local churches started falling off, as things were pre-decided and people were going to get there, and it was just kind of like, okay, we all affirm what we already talked about for years. I think there were some churches that were hesitant to come, and I think Moscow was one of those who at last minute pulled out. And yes, I know that the Constantinople, it was probably a slight to them, that they took it really hard and didn't help tensions in world orthodoxy today. And so this is as far as I can get into about that. I mean, I'm not 100% versed on everything, but that's my understanding of what happened at that council. But there's still many things to work out. Many topics that didn't get talked about that are very urgent. And I think we need to have another council to deal with what's going on in the church today, and we'll see where it goes. We'll keep praying to God that everyone has a humble spirit and that they allow the Holy Spirit to guide them on these matters. So that's about it, brothers and sisters. That's what we'll conclude today. I'll try to do one of these in the future again, where we can talk about. I think it went well. I thank everyone for your questions, and God bless you the rest of Bride Week. And we will meet each other and talk to each other sometime soon again. So, Christos voskreси, Christ is risen. May the Lord bless each and every one of you.